Official history textbooks call this period the year without a summer. In 1816, residents of Europe and North America faced a climate nightmare that couldn't be explained by the logic of the time. Snowstorms raged in Connecticut in June, and rivers froze in July and August. Massive crop failures, famine, and chaos erupted across the globe. This event didn't just change the climate, it became a curtain that fell over the true history of our planet. Official version. A convenient screen historians will offer you a simple explanation. The eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia the year before, ash supposedly rose into the atmosphere and blocked out the sun. But let's look at the facts without filters. Duration of the anomaly. Why did the volcanic winter last 3 years, acquiring a selective nature? Fallout composition. Modern researchers studying ice cores from that period are finding strange impurities in them that more closely resemble radioactive fallout than ordinary volcanic ash. Strange light. Witnesses of the time described the sky as dirty, copper, or gray, and the sun as a dim disk one could gaze at without squinting. Tartaric context. The end of the Golden Age. For those studying the alternative theory of Tartary, 1816 is more than just a natural cataclysm. It marks the end of a massive attack on the global empire of the Old World. We often see empty, deserted cities in ancient daguerreotypes. With architecture we cannot replicate today, star-shaped cities, majestic domes, and ancient spires. It was in 1816 that this network ceased to function. Why a nuclear winter? The nature of the destruction of that time is reminiscent of a global bombardment. Enormous sinkholes, which we today mistake for karst lakes, and the young forests of Siberia, where there are almost no trees older than 200 years, indicate that the planet experienced something far more terrifying than a volcanic eruption. The ash that buried cities and created that cultural layer or mudflow we spoke of in the story of the vanished century was the result of a massive incineration of cities and forests. 1816 marked the culmination of the destruction of Tartary, an empire whose wireless energy and liquid marble technologies made it too dangerous for the new architects of the world. When the sun disappeared behind the veil, a true rewriting of history began. Under the cover of eternal winter, people's true origins were erased from their memories, turning the heirs of a great civilization into frightened survivors, ready to believe any new lie. To understand what exactly was destroyed in the 1816 cataclysm, we must look at the architecture of the Old World, not as art, but as a high-tech circuit. The central hub of this civilization were the so-called star forts. Official history claims these were defensive forts built to protect against artillery. But if you look at them from above, you won't see fortresses, but giant microchips imprinted on the planet's landscape. Geometry as technology. Star forts are scattered across every continent, from Europe and Russia to America and Africa. Their shape, perfect fractals and polygons, makes no sense from a defensive standpoint. They have no blind spots for the enemy, but their design is too complex and excessive for simple warfare. In reality, these structures were nodes in a global wireless energy transmission network. Resonance systems. Each star beam and each water-filled mote serve to tune into specific frequencies of atmospheric electricity, the very same ether that would later be banned by mainstream science. Water as a conductor. The canals around the star cities weren't protective moats. They served as cooling systems and electrolytes for the gigantic power plants hidden beneath the foundations. The secret of liquid marble. The construction of such structures required precision beyond the capabilities of a chisel and hammer. This is where liquid marble technology, widely used in Tartary, comes into play. This was a geopolymer casting method that allowed for the creation of perfect geometric shapes, columns, and ornaments that, over time, transformed into ultra-strong stone. It was thanks to this liquid marble that the star cities retained their perfect symmetry even after centuries of neglect and erosion. Ancient power and giant builders. Who could manage such a global network? Your research on the giant builders finds direct confirmation here. The scale of the halls in the domed buildings, the enormous doorways, and the height of the steps in ancient structures indicate that the architects of this world were people much taller than us. These giants of Tartary were not just warriors, but engineers who created a system of free and clean energy for the entire planet, a unified world. Before the reset, this energy network made Tartary a unified organism. Electricity was extracted directly from the air by domes topped with antenna-like spires, which we today mistakenly call religious symbols. There was no need for wires, power plants, or burning fuel. The world was illuminated and warmed by the energy of the ether. However, it was precisely this connectivity that became the empire's Achilles heel. A system functioning as a single whole could be destroyed by a chain reaction. In 1812, a series of events began aimed at undermining key nodes in this network. As the stars began to fade one after another, this triggered a planetary-scale energy collapse, setting the stage for the darkness of 1816. If we accept the hypothesis that Tartary was not just a state, but a global energy system, then the events of 1812, 1816 appear in a completely different light. Official history describes this period as a series of disparate conflicts: the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the War of 1812 inches Russia, and the Anglo-American War in the United States. But if we superimpose the maps of these battles on a map of the star cities, it becomes clear this was a coordinated cleansing of key nodes in the etheric network. Moscow, 1812, thermal shock at the heart of the system. Napoleon's march on Moscow has always raised questions among honest historians. Why march on Moscow if the capital was St. Petersburg? Why enter an empty city? And why did it burn to the ground so strangely? Eyewitnesses described the fire of Moscow as something supernatural. The flames were blindingly white, and the stones melted like wax. This description perfectly matches a thermal or energy explosion of enormous power. Moscow was one of Tartary's most important energy hubs. The destruction of its central node triggered a cascading failure across the entire Eurasian part of the empire. What we call the fire was a deliberate detonation of an etheric installation, which not only destroyed the city, but also caused tectonic and atmospheric resonance. Synchronicity of destruction. While Napoleon was fighting, in Russia, in America, British troops were burning Washington, D.C., also a star city. During this short period of time, strange rebellions and fires occurred around the world, always targeting ancient buildings with domes and spires. Chain reaction. When key nodes, the star cities, began to explode, The protective dome of the atmosphere, supported by etheric antennas, collapsed. Mudflood. The collapse of the energy field led to a sharp change in pressure and temperature. Billions of tons of suspended matter, a mixture of ash, dust, and crushed rock, were ejected into the atmosphere. It was this radioactive rain of clay and sand that fell across the entire planet, burying the ground floors of the buildings we see today. The mechanism of 1816. The nuclear winter of 1816 was a direct consequence of this global attack. Dust from destroyed cities and scorched forests blocked out the sun for 3 years. But this wasn't just the ash of Mount Tambora. It was the ash of a destroyed civilization. The radiation levels recorded in the anomalies of that time explain the mass mutations and diseases that would later be called epidemics. The destruction of communication and energy hubs spelled the end of Tartary as a unified organism. Without the free electricity of the ether, ancient technologies became useless, piles of metal and stone. The giant guardians, deprived of communications and resources, found themselves vulnerable to new armies armed with primitive but effective gunpowder weapons. The darkness of 1816 allowed the new architects to emerge from the shadows. While the world froze, they were busy dividing up the assets of the great empire, methodically destroying the remaining documentary evidence that just 5 years earlier, the planet had been illuminated and warmed by an energy now declared impossible. The period from 1816 to 1819 was a time of profound geopolitical silence. While the skies were covered in ash and the survivors struggled with hunger and cold, behind the scenes of world events, a process was taking place that would officially be called the formation of the modern world order. In reality, it was a gigantic looting operation to divide up the inheritance of the fallen Tartary Empire. New masters of empty cities. While the energy grid of the star cities lay in ruins and the survivors were in a state of shock, the so-called new elites came to the forefront. The Romanovs in Russia, the Hanoverians in Great Britain, and their allies in Europe and America. Their armies entered not wild lands, but deserted ancient metropolises that only yesterday had been part of the global Tartary system. Colonization as occupation, what we call the development of Siberia, or the conquest of the Wild West, was the clearing of territories of the remnants of the former population and the appropriation of existing infrastructure. Trophy architecture. Majestic buildings with domes and columns constructed of liquid marble were declared new constructions or the work of new rulers. Erasing a name. Operation Encyclopedia. The most important stage of erasing the past was the erasure of the very memory of Tartary. Until the early 19th century, this name appeared on every world map, occupying vast expanses of Eurasia. After 1816, systematic censorship began. Destruction of maps. Old atlases were confiscated and replaced with new ones, where blank spots or new fictitious administrative boundaries appeared in place of Tartary. Rewriting the archives. The stories of families like Dimitri's, whose secrets could have shed light on the true past, were carefully concealed or falsified. The myth of the wild nomads. To explain the lack of technology across vast territories, the surviving inhabitants of Tartaria were transformed into illiterate nomads in official history, concealing their role as creators of the global energy system. The tragedy of the Guardians. The end of the Age of Giants. The liquidators paid particular attention to the destruction of the Keepers of Knowledge, the very same giant builders. Your research on the giants often dwells on their sudden disappearance. It was in the period after 1816 that a real hunt for them was declared. Biological cleansing. Those who survived the nuclear winter and the subsequent mudflow were methodically exterminated by the new regular armies. Museums as prisons. The remains of giants and their household items were either destroyed or hidden in closed museum collections and presented to the public as isolated anomalies or circus curiosities. The world was made small. The giants faded into oblivion. Their technologies were declared magic or myth, and the free energy of the ether was replaced by coal and oil, allowing the new elites to completely control humanity. 1816 was not only a climate catastrophe, but also an existential one. We became a civilization with amnesia, living in alien, renamed homes. We're used to thinking of nature as an eternal and unchanging witness to history. But if you look closely at the landscape around us, you'll see not age-old forests, but the scars of a recent and very large-scale catastrophe. Evidence of the nuclear winter of 1816 and the destruction of Tartary isn't hidden in secret vaults. It's right before our eyes. The mystery of the young taiga. Have you ever wondered why it's virtually impossible to find a tree older than 200 years in Siberia, the Urals, or North America? Official science blames forest fires and logging. But in vast territories devoid of people or industry, forests appear suspiciously young. The disappearance of giants. In old engravings and descriptions, we see forests of colossal trees, next to which modern pines look like grass. Where did they disappear to? Total devastation. The absence of old-growth forest supports the theory of a global firestorm that accompanied the destruction of the star cities. The forests we see today are secondary regrowth that grew on the ashes after the atmosphere cleared of the radioactive dust of 1816. Round lakes, sinkholes, not karsts. Hundreds of thousands of perfectly round lakes are scattered throughout Russia and the United States. Geologists call them karst sinkholes, or the aftermath of meteorite impacts. But why are there so many of them? And why are they concentrated precisely in areas where nodes of Tartary's energy network once stood? Impact trace. These lakes are remarkably reminiscent of craters left by powerful ground or air explosions. They have no inflowing rivers, often possessing abnormal depth and irregular geometric shape. Radioactive echo. Enthusiastic researchers often record residual radiation levels or magnetic anomalies in such places that cannot be explained by natural causes. These are traces of the very attack that plunged the world into darkness in 1816. Mudflow as the finale of the drama. Ash and dust from these explosions, mixed with water, caused the very same mudflood that buried the liquid marble architecture under a thick layer of sediment. This is why we see buried floors all over the world. This is not a cultural layer, but sediment from the greatest dump in history. Conclusion. Awakening of the heirs. 1816 became the point of no return. Great Tartary was erased from the maps. The giant builders were destroyed, and their wireless energy technologies were declared a myth. We live on the ruins of a civilization that was far wiser and stronger than us. Our family trees end precisely at this time, because we are the children of those who survived the ashes, whose memories were deliberately erased. But the evidence remains. It's in every buried window, in every perfectly round lake, and in our blood, which remembers the light of star cities. By studying these traces, we're not simply searching for an alternative history, we're reclaiming our right to know who we truly are.